There comes a moment in your life when you realize that respect cannot be begged for. It cannot be demanded through anger. It cannot be forced through threats. And it certainly cannot be maintained by constantly proving yourself to other people. Respect begins somewhere much quieter. It begins with the way you treat yourself. If you allow people to cross your boundaries again and again, they learn that your words have no weight. If you react emotionally to every insult, they learn exactly which buttons to press. If you keep explaining yourself to people who have already decided to misunderstand you, you give them control over your peace. But when you become calm, disciplined, and certain of who you are, something changes. You no longer need to announce your strength. People can feel it. You stop chasing approval. You stop arguing with everyone. You stop trying to make people understand your worth. You stop responding to every provocation as if every battle deserves your energy. And this is where real power begins. Because the strongest person in the room is not always the loudest person. Sometimes it is the person who says nothing, the person who listens, the person who observes, the person who remains calm while everyone else is losing control, the person who knows that disrespect does not always deserve a reaction. Sometimes it deserves a boundary. Sometimes it deserves distance. And sometimes it deserves nothing more than your absence. Understand this carefully. Your goal should never be to make people afraid of you. Your goal is to become someone whose boundaries are so clear, whose self-respect is so strong, and whose actions are so consistent that people understand there is a consequence to treating you without respect. You do not need to threaten anyone. You do not need to become cruel. You do not need to become cold. You simply need to stop abandoning yourself in order to keep other people comfortable. Because every time you tolerate what you know is wrong, you teach people that your standards can be negotiated. Every time you betray your own values just to avoid conflict, you weaken the relationship you have with yourself. And every time you remain calm, stand firm, and walk away from what diminishes you, you become stronger. So ask yourself honestly, how many times have you reacted because someone wanted a reaction? How many times have you explained yourself because you were afraid of being misunderstood? How many times have you accepted disrespect because you were afraid of losing someone? And how many times have you forgotten your own worth while trying to prove it to somebody else? The answer may be uncomfortable, but discomfort can be the beginning of transformation. Because you do not become powerful by controlling other people. You become powerful by mastering yourself. Master your emotions, master your words, master your impulses, master your boundaries, master the need to be understood. And most importantly, master the ability to walk away without hatred in your heart. When you reach that level of inner discipline, something remarkable happens. You no longer need everyone to respect you. You respect yourself enough that disrespect simply cannot stay close to you. And that is the kind of power that does not need to be announced. It is seen in the way you stand, the way you speak, the way you remain silent, the way you leave, and the way you never return to what repeatedly destroyed your peace. Today, you are going to understand that respect is not something you chase. It is something you build. And when you build it within yourself first, you stop begging the world to recognize your value. You become the kind of person who does not need to demand respect. Your presence, your discipline, and your boundaries speak for you. The way people treat you often begins with the way you allow yourself to be treated. This is not about blaming yourself for the poor behavior of others. You cannot control what another person chooses to do, but you can decide what you are willing to accept, what you will tolerate, and what you will walk away from. Respect begins with that decision. Before you expect the world to recognize your value, you must first recognize it yourself. Many people lose respect because they are afraid of losing relationships. They remain silent when something hurts them. They laugh when someone humiliates them. They accept repeated disrespect because they fear being alone. Slowly, they begin to teach others that their boundaries do not matter. Their words say, "Do not treat me this way," but their actions say, "You can do it again." And people always pay more attention to what you consistently allow than to what you occasionally complain about. Self-respect means becoming honest with yourself. It means understanding that being kind does not require you to accept everything. Being patient does not mean allowing people to repeatedly cross the same line. Being forgiving does not mean giving unlimited access to someone who continues to harm your peace. You can have compassion for people and still create distance. You can love someone and still refuse their behavior. You can remain calm without becoming weak. The problem is that many people confuse self-respect with aggression. They believe they must become loud, angry, or intimidating in order to be taken seriously. But true self-respect does not need a performance. It is quiet, it is clear, it is consistent. You do not need to threaten someone when you know what you will do if they cross your boundaries. You simply communicate your standards through your actions. When you respect yourself, you stop chasing people who repeatedly show you that they do not value your presence. You stop explaining your worth to those who only understand convenience. You stop changing who you are just to fit into places where you were never appreciated. You begin to understand that not everyone deserves unlimited access to your time, energy, attention, and emotions. This does not mean you become isolated from the world. It means you become more careful about what you allow into your life. Your attention is valuable. Your peace is valuable. Your time is something you can never recover. When you constantly give these things to people who disrespect you, you are sending yourself a message that your own well-being comes second. But the moment you begin honoring yourself, your decisions begin to change. You speak differently. You react differently. You stop rushing to answer every accusation. You stop feeling responsible for every person's opinion. You become less desperate to be liked because you understand that being respected by yourself is more important than being accepted by everyone else. Sometimes the most difficult part of self-respect is accepting that certain people may not like your boundaries. They were comfortable with the version of you who always said yes. They preferred the version of you who remained silent, explained everything, and tolerated behavior that you should never have accepted. When you change, they may call you cold, arrogant, or different. But you must ask yourself whether their comfort is more important than your dignity. You cannot build a strong life while constantly abandoning yourself to make others happy. At some point, you must become loyal to your own values. You must learn to trust yourself enough to say no. You must learn to leave situations that repeatedly take away your peace. And you must understand that every boundary you protect becomes a lesson in how you expect to be treated. Respect is not created in one dramatic moment. It is built through small decisions repeated every day. It is built when you keep your word to yourself, protect your peace, honor your values, and refuse to trade your dignity for temporary acceptance, until eventually you become someone who no longer needs to ask the world for respect, because you have learned never to abandon your own self-respect. One of the clearest signs of inner strength is the ability to control your reaction when someone tries to disturb your peace. Anyone can become angry. Anyone can raise their voice. Anyone can respond to an insult with another insult. But very few people can remain calm when they are being provoked. This is why emotional control is one of the strongest forms of power you can develop. When you control your reactions, you stop giving other people the ability to control your state of mind. Think about what happens when someone knows exactly how to make you angry. They say one sentence, and suddenly your emotions take over. You start explaining yourself. You raise your voice. You defend your character. You say things you later regret. At that moment, the other person has discovered your weakness. They have found the button that controls your behavior, and whenever they want to disturb you, they only need to press it. But imagine the opposite. Imagine someone insults you and you remain calm. They try to provoke you and you simply observe. They expect an emotional response, but you give them silence. They become louder, but you become quieter. They try to pull you into an argument, but you refuse to enter the battlefield. That is control. Not because you are afraid to respond, but because you are capable of choosing whether a response is necessary. There is a difference between reacting and responding. A reaction happens automatically. A response is chosen. Reaction comes from impulse. Response comes from awareness. When someone disrespects you, your first emotion may be anger, and that is natural. But you do not have to become that anger. You can notice it without obeying it. This is where discipline becomes powerful. Before you speak, pause. Before you send the message, pause. Before you make the decision, pause. Give yourself enough space to decide whether your next action will protect your dignity or simply satisfy your anger. Anger often wants immediate action. Wisdom is willing to wait. When you respond from anger, you give the situation control over you. When you respond from clarity, you take that control back. This does not mean you should become passive. Calmness does not mean weakness. You can be calm and still be firm. You can speak clearly without shouting. You can say no without insulting anyone. You can establish a boundary without turning the situation into a war. Sometimes a calm sentence carries more power than 100 angry words. Sometimes walking away says more than arguing ever could. And sometimes silence is not surrender. It is self-control. People often test emotional boundaries because they want to see how easily they can influence you. If every small comment changes your mood, your confidence, or your behavior, then you are allowing external events to control your internal world. But when you become emotionally disciplined, something changes. Other people can speak, but they cannot easily move you. You begin to understand that not every opinion deserves your attention. Not every insult deserves an answer. Not every misunderstanding requires an explanation. Not every person deserves access to your emotional energy. Your peace becomes more valuable than winning an argument. Your clarity becomes more important than proving yourself right. Your dignity becomes more important than having the last word. And this is when people begin to experience you differently. They may not always understand your silence, but they recognize that they cannot easily manipulate your emotions. They learn that provoking you will not give them the satisfaction they expected. They realize that you are not controlled by every word spoken about you. The strongest person is not the person who can destroy everyone who disrespects them. The strongest person is the one who has enough control over themselves that they do not need to destroy anyone. You do not need to become emotionless. You need to become the master of your emotions. Feel anger, but do not become anger. Feel disappointment, but do not allow disappointment to control your decisions. Feel hurt, but do not let the hurt determine your character. Notice the emotion, breathe, step back, and choose your action carefully. Because when you stop reacting to everything, you become difficult to manipulate. When you stop allowing other people's behavior to dictate your emotional state, you reclaim your power. And when you can remain calm while others are trying to pull you into chaos, you discover that real strength was never about controlling other people, but about becoming so disciplined within yourself that no one else can easily take control of your mind. A boundary is not a wall that you build to keep everyone away. It is a clear line that tells people where your responsibility ends and theirs begins. Without boundaries, even the kindest person can become exhausted, frustrated, and eventually resentful. You may give your time, your attention, your energy, your forgiveness, and your understanding. But if you never communicate what you will and will not accept, people may continue crossing limits simply because they do not see a consequence. The mistake many people make is believing that setting boundaries requires a long explanation. They think they must convince the other person that their feelings are justified. They explain why something hurt them, why they deserve respect, why a certain behavior is unacceptable, and why they cannot continue accepting it. But the more you explain a boundary to someone who has no intention of respecting it, the more opportunities you give them to argue with it. A boundary does not need everyone's approval to be valid. You can simply say no. You can step away. You can stop responding. You can reduce access. You can change the way you participate in a relationship. You do not need to turn every boundary into a debate. This is especially important when dealing with people who deliberately test your limits. They may ask, "Why are you acting differently?" They may accuse you of being selfish. They may tell you that you have changed. They may try to make you feel guilty for protecting yourself. If you are not careful, you may begin defending your boundary instead of maintaining it. Remember, you are not responsible for making someone comfortable with a boundary they dislike. Your responsibility is to communicate it clearly and live according to it. For example, if someone repeatedly speaks to you disrespectfully, you do not need to insult them back. You can calmly say that you will not continue the conversation while being spoken to that way. Then, if the behavior continues, you leave the conversation. Your power does not come from the sentence you said. It comes from the fact that your actions matched your words. This is where consistency becomes important. A boundary without action becomes a request. If you tell someone, "Do not treat me this way," and then repeatedly accept the same behavior, your words lose meaning. But when you calmly follow through, people begin to understand that your standards are real. This does not mean you should punish people. It means you should protect yourself. There is a great difference between punishment and consequence. Punishment says, "I want you to suffer because you hurt me." A consequence says, "Because this behavior does not work for me, I will remove myself from the situation." One comes from revenge, the other comes from self-respect. You should not set boundaries to make people fear you. Set boundaries so that you can remain at peace with yourself. When you stop over-explaining, you also become less dependent on other people's understanding. Not everyone will understand your decisions. Not everyone will agree with your standards. Some people will misunderstand your silence. Some will criticize your distance. Let them. Your life does not become more peaceful when everyone understands you. It becomes more peaceful when you stop needing everyone to understand you. This requires courage because boundaries often reveal the true nature of relationships. The people who genuinely value you may respect your limits, even when they do not completely agree with them. The people who benefited from your lack of boundaries may become angry when you finally establish them. That reaction can teach you something important. Sometimes people are not upset because your boundary is unfair. They are upset because the boundary prevents them from getting what they previously received without resistance. Do not confuse their discomfort with your wrongdoing. You can be respectful and still be firm. You can be compassionate and still say no. You can forgive someone and still keep your distance. You can understand someone's struggles without allowing those struggles to become an excuse for mistreating you. The more you practice this, the less you will feel the need to defend yourself. Your words become shorter. Your actions become clearer. Your standards become stronger. You stop saying, "Please understand why I cannot accept this." Instead, your life quietly communicates, "This is what I accept, and this is what I do when that standard is crossed." That is the power of a boundary. It does not demand attention. It does not require anger. It does not need an audience. It simply creates clarity. And when you become consistent with that clarity, people begin to understand that your kindness is not weakness, your patience is not permission, and your silence is not an invitation to keep crossing the line. There is a moment in life when you must understand that walking away is not losing. Sometimes walking away is the clearest expression of self-respect. Many people remain in situations that continuously drain them because they are afraid of what will happen if they leave. They fear being alone. They fear being misunderstood. They fear that people will think they failed. They fear losing someone they once cared about. But when you become comfortable walking away from disrespect, you discover a kind of freedom that cannot be given to you by anyone else. You cannot control how another person behaves, but you can control your access to that behavior. If someone repeatedly disrespects you, you do not have to remain close enough to experience it again and again. You do not have to keep arguing. You do not have to keep demanding an apology. You do not have to keep proving that you deserve better. Sometimes the strongest response is simply to remove yourself. Walking away does not always mean ending a relationship forever. Sometimes it means ending the conversation. Sometimes it means leaving the room. Sometimes it means creating distance. Sometimes it means no longer giving your attention to someone who constantly uses it against you. The important thing is that you stop believing you must stay in every situation simply because you once entered it. Many people stay because they confuse attachment with loyalty. They say, "I have known this person for years," or "I have invested so much into this relationship," as if time automatically makes disrespect acceptable. But your history with someone should not become a prison. The fact that you have invested years into something does not mean you must sacrifice more years to protect the past. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to outgrow relationships. You are allowed to decide that something which once felt acceptable no longer belongs in your life. And when you make that decision, you do not need to leave with hatred. In fact, leaving with hatred means that the person may still control your emotions. True freedom is when you can walk away without needing revenge. You can recognize what happened, learn from it, and continue your life without carrying the weight of anger everywhere you go. This is difficult because the ego wants closure. It wants the other person to admit they were wrong. It wants an apology. It wants them to realize what they lost. It wants them to regret their behavior. But sometimes you will never receive that satisfaction. You must learn to create your own closure. Your closure can be the decision that you will not participate in the same pattern anymore. You do not need someone else's apology to protect your future. You do not need their understanding to validate your decision. You do not need their permission to leave. When you become willing to walk away, your relationships begin to change. You no longer tolerate disrespect simply because you are afraid of losing someone. You stop negotiating with behavior that repeatedly violates your values. You become more selective about who receives your time and energy. And strangely enough, walking away can make your presence more valuable. Not because you are trying to manipulate people into fearing your absence, but because you are demonstrating that your presence is not something they can take for granted. When people know you have the strength to leave unhealthy situations, they understand that access to you comes with responsibility. But remember, the goal is not to make people afraid of losing you. The goal is to become unafraid of losing people who do not respect you. That is a completely different kind of strength. When you no longer fear being alone, you become less willing to accept poor treatment simply to maintain company. When you no longer need everyone to stay, you can finally choose relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear. This does not mean walking away at the first disagreement. Strong relationships require patience, communication, forgiveness, and understanding. Not every mistake is disrespect. Not every conflict means you should leave. Sometimes people make mistakes and genuinely change. Sometimes a difficult conversation can repair what was broken. The wisdom is knowing the difference between a mistake and a pattern. A mistake may deserve communication. A pattern may require distance. When someone repeatedly shows you that they do not respect your boundaries, believe what their actions are telling you. Do not become addicted to their potential while ignoring their behavior. Your life becomes lighter when you stop chasing people who continuously make you question your worth. You begin to understand that your peace is not something you should sacrifice just because someone refuses to treat you properly. And one day, you realize that walking away was never about proving that you were stronger than them. It was about finally proving to yourself that you were strong enough to choose your own peace. Real respect is not created by demanding that people respect you. It is created by becoming the kind of person whose actions naturally communicate discipline, consistency, confidence, and self-control. People may hear your words, but they will judge your character through what you repeatedly do. This is why your reputation is built through action rather than announcement. You can tell people that you are strong, disciplined, and serious, but if your behavior constantly contradicts those words, nobody will believe you. Your actions speak when you are silent. They speak when someone provokes you and you remain calm. They speak when you make a promise and keep it. They speak when you say no and do not change your decision simply because someone pressures you. They speak when you walk away from an argument instead of allowing anger to control you. Every small decision becomes part of the reputation you create. Consistency is what gives your character weight. If you are respectful one day and aggressive the next, people do not know what to expect from you. If you establish a boundary today but ignore it tomorrow, people learn that your standards are temporary. If you say you value your time but constantly make yourself available to anyone who demands your attention, your actions are sending a different message. This is why discipline matters. Discipline is not only about waking up early, exercising, or working toward a goal. Discipline also means controlling what you say what you tolerate, where you place your attention, and how you respond when your emotions become intense. A disciplined person does not need to prove their strength every moment. They simply live according to their principles. This creates a quiet form of authority. You do not need to enter a room and demand attention. People notice the person who is comfortable with silence. They notice the person who does not constantly seek approval. They notice the person who can disagree without becoming disrespectful. They notice the person who can admit a mistake without losing confidence. This is where true confidence becomes different from arrogance. Arrogance needs to be seen. Confidence does not. Arrogance says, I need you to know that I am important. Confidence says, I know who I am, whether you recognize it or not. When you stop seeking validation, your behavior becomes more natural. You no longer change your personality depending on who is watching. You do not become smaller around powerful people or larger around insecure people. You remain grounded. That consistency makes your presence powerful. People begin to understand what they can expect from you. They know that you will speak when something matters. They know that you will not tolerate repeated disrespect. They know that you will not explode over every small problem. They know that your kindness does not mean you are easy to manipulate. This kind of reputation takes time. You cannot build it through one conversation. You build it through hundreds of small choices that nobody may notice. You choose patience when anger would be easier. You choose honesty when lying would be convenient. You choose discipline when laziness would be comfortable. You choose silence when arguing would feed your ego. You choose distance when staying would destroy your peace. Eventually, those choices become your character, and your character becomes your reputation. The important thing is not to live for other people's opinions. If your entire life is designed around how others perceive you, then you are still allowing them to control you. Build your character because you want to respect the person you see when you are alone, not because you want strangers to admire you. When you become internally consistent, external respect often follows naturally. You do not have to chase it. You do not have to demand it. You do not have to intimidate people into giving it. Your behavior communicates enough. And there will still be people who disrespect you. There will always be someone who misunderstands you, criticizes you, or tries to provoke you. Your strength is not measured by whether everyone respects you. It is measured by whether their behavior can pull you away from your principles. Stay grounded. Stay disciplined. Stay respectful without becoming submissive. Stay firm without becoming cruel. Let your actions become stronger than your words. Because when your character is consistent, your boundaries are clear, your emotions are controlled, and your decisions are aligned with your values. People begin to understand that your calmness is not weakness, your kindness is not permission, and your silence is not emptiness. It is the visible result of a person who has spent enough time mastering themselves that they no longer need to prove their power to anyone.